Help! I screamed furiously, wiping my face. The slime all over me. I'm hanging upside down. The creature with the red eyes moved closer. Its claws slowly cut into my skin on my thigh. I could smell the stench of rotten meat and feel the warmth of my blood as it dripped down my leg. "Wake up, Jake! Hey, Jake, wake up!" my roommate shouted as he shook me awake. I finally woke up. Sweat dripped down my back. I felt a pressure lifting off my chest as I gasped for air. I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. Okay, just another night of this nightmare, I thought to myself. I had been having the same nightmare for the past couple weeks. It always started out the same. I am walking down an unknown hallway in a dormitory. As if in a horror movie, the lights would flicker out. The hallway lights are dimming. Next, would hear an ominous sound of a little boy calling my name. The little boy wore a blue hat and a tan school uniform. The little boy would then run down the hall towards me really fast and disappear right before reaching me. So close each time, and still I flinched only to find myself hung upside down in a dark room. First the stench of rotten meat, next the heavy breathing, then I find myself facing a creature with red eyes and sharp claws. I can't make out the creature's face, but I can feel that he is huge. The dream will always end right before the creature finishes digging his claws into my flesh. As I kept experiencing this nightmare, things started to feel more and more real. I started to wake up with unexplained scratches on my arm and chest. That time, I woke up with a burning sensation on my thigh. "Dude, look at your leg," my roommate said in terror. I looked down and saw a long red scratch on my thigh. This time, whatever it was had actually broken the skin on my thigh. Horrified, I quickly got up and wiped my thigh with my hands. I wanted to make sure I wasn't still dreaming. The pain faded away soon after I woke up, but the scratch remained. That Friday morning, I went to class half asleep. I must have dozed off. I heard my professor calling my name. The class let out a quiet laugh. I lifted my head up, embarrassed. I opened my textbook, buried my face in it, and stayed silent. After class, my professor told me to meet him in his office. I followed him. After gesturing for me to sit down, he asked if there was something going on with me. He had noticed I was looking more tired lately. "You seem more withdrawn and quiet. Is everything okay?" he asked. I told him, yeah, everything is okay. I couldn't tell him about my nightmares. He would have thought I was going crazy. After a short conversation about my declining performance and quality of work in that class, I left his office and continued the rest of my day. Later that night, a few buddies and my roommate wanted to go out to the bar. I declined. I had an important essay to finish, so I stayed back in my dorm by myself. At about 2 a.m., I heard a knock on my door. I looked and it was my roommate. I opened the door and let him in. He didn't say much and sat on the bed. I returned to my desk and continued to work on my essay. My back turned towards him. "How was the bar?" I asked. There was no response. I smiled, thinking he had passed out. Suddenly, I heard a knock on the door and the laughter of my drunken buddies. I went to open the door and there was my roommate, passed out drunk. My buddies held him like a wounded comrade. I felt my guts sink. My throat dried up as I slowly turned around and looked at my room. No one was there. "Watcha looking for?" one of them asked jokingly. "A ghost?" They laughed as they brought my roommate in and threw him on his bed. They patted me on the back as they were leaving, making jokes about the look on my face. "You must have seen a ghost," one said. "Nah, he just needs to get laid," said another. I sat there staring at my roommate. I swore I would punch him if he was trying to play a prank on me. He is the only other person who knew about my nightmares. He just laid there, passed out like a hibernating bear. I closed my laptop and went to bed. I stared at him all night to make sure it was really him. Later that week, I was heading home late one night from my part-time job at the gas station down the road. I didn't have a car at the time, so I walked. It must have been about midnight. As I was walking down the dark road, I noticed the silhouette of a man standing by the building. Suddenly, I heard a growl from behind me. I quickly looked but didn't see anyone. I quickened my pace and started to dash for the entrance of the dorm. It felt like something had tripped me. I found myself hitting the ground. My body is tumbling over. I looked up and saw the silhouette of the man standing over me. "Jake," he whispered. "Remember me?" His eyes glowed red. Terrified, I crawled away frantically before finding the strength to get up and run away. When I reached my dorm room, my roommate asked what had happened. I couldn't tell him. I was trying to catch my breath, trying not to shit myself. After that, I moved out of that dorm room and moved in with one of my buddies at his apartment. The dreams are less frequent now, and I haven't had any more encounters with that man. I avoided dark roads and hallways for a long time. I still go to bed every night afraid that I will see that man when I wake up. Let me share a truly scary paranormal experience with you today. I still get chills talking about it. The hair on my arm still stands whenever I mention this experience. In 2001, my family moved away from the inner city. My father bought a home on the outskirts of town. It was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom ranch home that he bought from a widow whose husband had recently died during a fishing trip in Canada. Shortly after we moved then, we started to hear footsteps at night and odd sounds throughout the house. At first we thought it was the furnace or the pipes, but eventually my father ruled that out too. I had 3 brothers and 1 sister. I was 16 and the oldest at the time. We used to play hide and seek quite a bit. There weren't other kids our age for miles, and so we spent more time in this home than outside. Anyhow, our basement was separated into 3 rooms. One room was an open space that was directly in front of the staircase. The other side of the basement was separated into 2 rooms. One room was for storage. It was about the size of a large walk-in closet. The other room was made into a living area, and that's where we put our furniture and sofa. We often played in that second living room down there because it had carpeting. I remember one particular day when my brothers and sister and I were playing in the basement. We had this idea of playing hide and seek in the dark. So we turned off all the lights. I was the one the seeker and my siblings were hiding. I counted to 10 and I turned around to start looking for them in the basement. As I started walking around in the dark, looking for my brother and sisters, I would shout out Marco and they would reply Polo. We had played this game many times before in the basement with the lights off. I made my way into the second living room and I heard a child whispering. I smiled and thought that it was my sister. Then I saw a shadow move across the wall into the corner behind the couch. I giggled and started walking in that direction, thinking that I was about to find my first victim. I walked over to the corner behind the couch and I said, "Boo, I found you." And I figured it up facing me. I could feel it was the size of a little child. It did not say anything or make a single sound. At that moment, I heard my sister laughing at me from outside the room. I turned to look in her direction in the dark. At that point, I was a bit freaked out. I felt chills and the hair of my arm stood up. Then I looked back to find the figure in front of me had disappeared. I quickly ran out of that second living room and turned on all the lights. To my surprise, I found my brother and sisters all huddled together behind the exercise equipment in the open space of our basement. I was freaked out, and I decided to quit playing this game. I took my younger brothers and sister upstairs, and we watched television instead for the rest of the night. One night, he came to my parents and told them that a little boy was peeping through the closet doors. My parents didn't believe him, and they thought his imagination was just going wild. He would describe the boy as a 9-year-old child with no hair. He never said that the child looked scary. He just said the child would pop his head out of the closet door or around the corner from time to time. One hot summer night, our air conditioner unit had broken down. Our house was really hot, and so we set up a window unit and we all slept in the living room. It was the only room in the house that had air conditioning at that time. We laid on the ground with our head towards the door and our feet towards the kitchen. To my right was the TV and the window where the air conditioning unit was placed. The sofa was perpendicular to the front door. It was a relatively quiet night until my brother started having a nosebleed. He came up to me and told me his nose was bleeding. He was about 6 years old at the time. I took him to the bathroom and cleaned him up, and we stuffed Kleenex up his nose. I noticed his nose was a bit pink, but not from the blood. It looked like he had bumped it. I asked him, and he told me that the little boy pinched his nose and caused it to bleed. I asked him, "What little boy are you talking about?" He replied, "The one in my closet." I was already a bit spooked at that time upon hearing those words. I escorted him back to the living room and returned on the TV. I was 16 at that time, and my parents were at work. It was about 10 o'clock, and my father usually got home around 12:30 at night. I felt a bit more secure knowing that he would be home in about 2 hours. I picked up the phone and called my boyfriend to see if he was coming over after work. He told me he will be working a late shift until about 11 o'clock, and then he was going to head home because he was tired. As I was talking to him, I heard a loud scratch go across the carpet. I thought the sound came from my brother. He was still awake and sitting on the floor. I continued to talk to my boyfriend. Then I heard that same sound again. This time I knew for sure it wasn't my brother because he was sitting next to me. My 2 other brothers and my sister was asleep at that time. I started feeling an eerie feeling in the air, a change in pressure that I can't quite explain, a feeling that made you want to leave the room. I told my boyfriend on the phone that I didn't feel safe and felt creeped out by what I heard. He reassured me that everything was okay and he would try to get off early to visit. Because it was 10 p.m., I told him not worry and I would call him if anything happened. We hung up the phone. At about 11 p.m., my 6-year-old brother fell asleep on my lap. I was sitting on the sofa when I started to doze off. I had just closed my eyes when I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. I opened my eyes to see a shadow figure standing by the dining room table. Suddenly, my brother started to make gurgling noises next to me. It sounded as if he was underwater and couldn't breathe. I turned around to see a little boy sitting on his chest. The little boy had no hair, was bald, and had dark black skin. Its eyes were all white. It sat on my brother's chest like a frog. That thing was staring at me with an emotionless face. Its arm extended with the hands covering my brother's mouth and eyes. I felt a fear so deep I couldn't explain it in words. My body froze and I felt as if I lost my voice. Time stood still as I was staring into the face of this thing. Then I remember something that my father had told me. He said if I'm ever faced with something beyond the human realm, have courage and be brave. This will almost always give me the upper hand. I gathered all my courage and I picked up that little boy and threw him into the TV. I distinctly remember that the 30-inch box TV moved and the screen cracked. I still remember the sound the thing made as it hit the TV. It sounded similar to a screeching cat mix with growling sounds. Then it vanished into thin air. My 6-year-old brother started crying and I looked at him. He was laying on the sofa with his hands covering his face. His nose was bleeding profusely. I picked up the phone, but it wouldn't connect. At this point, I'm freaking out and crying. I thought, what the fuck was that? And what the hell am I going to do? As I saw the blood overflow from his hands. I took my t-shirt off. I used it as a towel, trying to stop his nose from bleeding. I held his head down to stop the blood from going down the back of his throat. I tried to prevent him from gagging and vomiting. I applied pressure to the bridge of his nose. I held him in my arms and I rocked him back and forth while crying, trying to calm both of us down. At this point, I'm hearing rattling sounds coming from the basement. I started praying to God for protection to get rid of whatever was causing all this. I looked up to the ceiling as if I was looking up to the heavens. I remember just shouting whatever came to my mind as I prayed to God for protection and to help my brother's nose stop bleeding. As soon as said amen, the phone rang and it was my boyfriend. He told me that he was on his way to see us. I could hear the concern in his voice. He told me he had an ominous feeling at work. He had heard my voice calling his name. Then he saw my reflection in the window and it freaked him out. So he lied to his boss that there was a family emergency, and he left. Within 5 minutes, he was at my house. We looked around and didn't see anything. Then I remembered that I had thrown that little boy into the TV. When I went to look at the TV, there was nothing broken and everything was still intact. It had not moved. My boyfriend stayed with us that night until my dad came home. We told my dad what happened and showed him my t-shirt that was soaked in blood. By that time, the commotion had woken my other siblings. They were crying because they were afraid of the rattling noises. My brother's bloody nose had also stopped. My father and my boyfriend stayed in the living room with us that night. We left all the lights on and there were no further incidents. In the morning, I heard him talking to my mother about this. They were talking in their rooms, so I could only make out a few things that were said. I heard my mother voice her concerns about this home. She had personally experienced some paranormal activity as well. Later, my father would confess to seeing apparitions that looked like us when he was home alone. With nowhere to go, we continued to live in that house for 5 more years. During those years, we experienced more paranormal activities. Even though all this occurred 22 years ago, it feels like yesterday. I still have nightmares about that place. Because of this feeling, I will share the rest of these memories another time.